Sometimes in life we come to a fork in the road, a place where two opposing forces shout from different hills, telling us which direction is right. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about understanding why hearts are hardened and why silence from one corner of the world can still echo like thunder across the globe. Right now, the world is watching Ukraine. Again, we're watching homes crumble under missiles. We're watching mothers hold their babies underground. And we're watching a leader, Vladimir Putin, double down in ways that send shivers through every peace-loving soul. Now you may ask, why? Why when the world pleads for diplomacy? Why when families are torn apart and the weight of war is breaking the backs of both soldiers and civilians alike? Because power, my friends, when it's rooted in fear, does not let go easily. You see, Putin is not just fighting a war of geography. No, he's fighting a war of legacy, of pride, of control. He is trying to rewrite the narrative of a crumbling past with the ink of bloodshed. He sees Ukraine not as a neighbor, but as a chapter stolen from a book he believes was once his to write. And that belief, that conviction, it makes a man dangerous. It makes him desperate. But in the middle of that desperation, a familiar voice rises in the West, Donald J. Trump. A man with his own complicated history, with his own version of what peace should look like. He's standing on stages, waving to crowds, calling for the guns to go silent. And some are listening, some are cheering, some are wondering, how can a man who once flexed military muscle now speak the language of peace? Let me tell you what I believe. I believe that truth is not always clear. I believe that in Trump's calls for peace, there are threads of political strategy intertwined with genuine exhaustion. Because peace for him has always been about winning deals, not necessarily healing wounds. It's a different kind of peace, not born from empathy, but from calculation. And yet, let us not dismiss peace, no matter who speaks it. Let us not become so cynical that we close the door to peace because we don't like the messenger. But let us also not be fooled. Peace is not a word that can be thrown like confetti at a campaign rally. Peace is built, brick by brick, with diplomacy, with sacrifice, with courage. Real courage, the kind that stands up to tyranny, not the kind that looks away. And what Putin is doing in Ukraine, that is not courage, that is not strength. That is a man grasping at control in a world that's already moving on, a world that says sovereignty matters, freedom matters, people matter. The reason Russia is doubling down is not because they're winning, it's because they're afraid of losing influence, afraid of losing their grip on a post-Soviet fantasy, afraid of a new generation rising up in Ukraine that doesn't want to be pulled backward into the shadows of empire. And Trump, he sees opportunity. He sees a divided world where his voice, loud and unfiltered, can sway hearts that are weary from war. Some see him as a savior, others as a distraction. But let us be clear, words alone cannot end a war. Peace needs more than microphones. It needs intention. It needs honesty. It needs unity. So here we are, in a moment where bombs still fall, where fathers hug their children goodbye, not knowing if they'll ever come back, where old men in suits talk of borders, while young men in trenches pray for morning. And I ask you, where do we stand? Because the question is not just about Putin or Trump. It's about us, about our humanity, about our collective soul. Are we numb? Are we too tired to care? Or are we bold enough to believe that peace is still possible, but only if we face the truth, no matter how painful it may be? My prayer tonight is for Ukraine. My hope is that the world remembers the people behind the politics, that we do not let this war become background noise, that we challenge every leader, whether in Moscow or Mar-a-Lago, to put humanity first, because peace is not passive, peace is not silent, peace is action, and every life lost is one too many. There comes a moment in every conflict where the fight is no longer just about the present. It becomes about how the past is remembered, about what stories will be told. And that, my friend, is where Vladimir Putin finds himself now. You see, this war in Ukraine, it stopped being just about geography a long time ago. It's not just a map he's after. It's memory, legacy, the echo of an empire long dissolved, but never fully grieved. For Putin, the Soviet Union wasn't just a government. It was a chapter in his soul. A chapter where power, order, and fear wrote every line. And when it collapsed, when that red flag came down and the West cheered, it left something burning deep within him. A sense of humiliation, of loss, of unfinished business. And so now, decades later, he isn't just trying to win a war, he's trying to rewrite that ending. That's why he's doubling down. That's why he sends missiles when the world begs for talks. That's why even when his soldiers are stretched thin, even when his economy is crumbling under sanctions, he does not back down. Because backing down for him is not just defeat, it is erasure.
It is the end of a dream that he has carried like a scar across his chest. A dream where Russia is once again feared, respected, and dominant. You and I, we've lived long enough to know that wounded pride is one of the most dangerous emotions a leader can carry. It twists the mind, it clouds the heart, it makes you do things not for your people, but for your place in history. And that's what we're watching unfold. A man who refuses to lose not just because of strategy, but because of pride. Now that doesn't excuse the bombs falling on cities. It doesn't justify the families torn apart, the children crying in basements, the elders clutching photos of loved ones lost. It doesn't excuse war crimes or lies or the manipulation of truth, but it helps us understand the mindset. Because if we want to bring about peace, we can't just fight the weapons. We have to understand the wound behind the war. And Putin's wound runs deep. He sees Ukraine's independence not as a neighbor choosing its own path, but as a betrayal, a rebellion. And every time Ukraine draws closer to Europe, to NATO, to democracy, it's like salt in that old wound. So he reacts the way wounded people often do. He lashes out, tries to pull them back through force, through fear, through fire. But what he doesn't realize is that the world has changed, that people are no longer so easily ruled by fear, that nations like people grow, they find their voice, and Ukraine has found its voice. It is loud, it is brave, it is unshakable. No matter how many tanks cross the border, the Ukrainian spirit refuses to be conquered. And that defiance, it enrages him, because it reminds him that the old rules no longer apply. That power doesn't come just from missiles or maps, but from unity, from resilience, from hope. So yes, Russia is doubling down, but not because it is strong. No, it's because it is afraid. Afraid of losing control, afraid of fading from relevance, afraid of the new world order that is rising without it. And in that fear, Putin is throwing everything he has at Ukraine, believing that sheer force can turn back the clock. But the clock does not run backward. And while he may still believe that tanks can shape history, the truth is that it is people who write the story of tomorrow. People like the Ukrainian mothers, wrapping their children in courage every night. People like the doctors, the teachers, the farmers who keep going despite the sound of sirens. People who say, you may destroy our buildings, but you will never destroy our will. That is the real battle. That is the story Putin cannot rewrite. And so as he doubles down, as he digs deeper into this war, we must not look away. We must not become numb, because what we are witnessing is a lesson, a warning, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked and legacy becomes more important than life. This war is not just about tanks and treaties. It is about the soul of leadership, about the danger of nostalgia, about the cost of pride. And if we are to ever find peace, not just in Ukraine, but anywhere, we must learn from this moment. We must teach our children that strength does not come from domination, but from compassion. That true legacy is not built in battlefields, but in classrooms, in communities, in hearts that are healed, not harmed. There's something deeply human about the fear of being forgotten. We all feel it, whether it's a parent watching their child grow independent, or a once great athlete seeing the spotlight move on. Now imagine that fear inside a nation. Imagine a country that once stood at the center of the world stage, feared, respected, powerful, and then watched as its influence slowly faded into shadows. That is Russia. That is the pain behind its actions. And that is why it is doubling down in Ukraine, not because of strength, but because of fear. The fear of becoming irrelevant. Vladimir Putin is not just waging a war against a neighboring country. He's waging a war against time, against the decline of Russian dominance, against a world that's moving forward without Moscow's approval. You see, after the Cold War, Russia never truly healed. It didn't rebuild its global status through compassion or cooperation. It held on to old memories of power and fear, and those memories have now turned into desperation. The truth is, the world has changed. China is rising. The United States still leads many of the global institutions. The European Union is becoming more unified. And in all of this, Russia is feeling squeezed, isolated by sanctions, challenged by NATO, dismissed by modern markets. And that hurts. That humiliation isn't just political, it's personal. For Putin, it's existential. When you feel you're being pushed out of relevance, there are two choices. You can adapt, or you can rage. And Putin has chosen to rage. By invading Ukraine, he's trying to force the world to look at him again, to say we are still here, we still matter. But here's what's heartbreaking. He's chosen destruction as his spotlight. He's chosen pain as his platform. Because in his mind, attention, even through fear, is better than silence. This isn't new in history. Empires have often fallen this way, not through diplomacy or dignity, but through acts of desperation. When a fading power tries to assert itself by violence, by intimidation, by forcing others to acknowledge its existence, that's what doubling down looks like. It's not strategy, it's a cry for validation. But let's be clear, that cry is being paid for with human lives. While Putin tries to prove Russia's importance, innocent people are dying. Cities are being reduced to rubble. Children are waking up to the sound of air raid sirens instead of lullabies. And all because one man and one nation cannot bear the idea of being left behind. Now, you may wonder, why doesn't the world's pressure stop him? Why don't the sanctions, the isolation, the condemnation work? Because for Russia, especially for Putin, those punishments don't weaken the cause, they fuel it. In his worldview, every sanction is proof that the West fears him. Every act of condemnation is a badge of honor. It's twisted logic, but it makes sense when you're fighting not for peace, but for pride. Pride can make you blind. It can make you destroy what you claim to protect. It can make a leader sacrifice his own people's future just to maintain the illusion of power. And that's what we're watching in real time. An entire country suffering under economic pressure, political suppression, and global scorn. Also, one man can keep the narrative alive that Russia is still a global force to be reckoned with. And it's not just external fear, it's internal too. Putin knows that within his own borders, cracks are forming. The Russian people are not all united behind this war. Many are afraid to speak, many are being silenced. But deep down he knows, when a country's future is built on fear, not faith, it's only a matter of time before it collapses. So he doubles down, he censors, he arrests, he rewrites history, he spreads propaganda, all to keep the illusion alive, all to convince the world, and maybe even himself, that Russia is not a relic of the past, but a ruler of the future. But here's the truth, you cannot build relevance through ruin, you cannot earn respect by terrorizing your neighbors, you cannot be seen as powerful while your people suffer, your youth flee, and your nation falls behind in innovation, freedom, and progress. Russia deserves better than this, its people deserve better than this. They are more than this war, more than this fear, more than this legacy of loss. They are scientists, artists, dreamers, parents, children, and they are being dragged into a nightmare, because one man is afraid the world will forget his name, but the world will not forget. It will remember, but not as he hopes. It will remember the lives lost, the courage of the Ukrainian people, and the danger of letting pride drive policy, because in the end, true relevance doesn't come from dominance. It comes from contribution, from compassion, from building something that lasts longer than fear. So as Russia doubles down, let us not be fooled. Let us not mistake desperation for strength. Let us remember that history is not kind to those who fight to be remembered through pain. It is kind to those who lift others up, who choose hope over fear, and who understand that the greatest power.
There's something powerful about a voice that calls for peace. We want to believe it. We need to believe it, especially when the world feels like it's spinning out of control. So when Donald J. Trump steps up on stage and says this war should never have happened, or I would have stopped it, some people stop and listen, some even cheer. But we must ask ourselves, what is really behind that voice? Because peace, my dear friends, is not just about what you say. It's about what you do. When Trump talks about ending the war in Ukraine, he paints it like a deal he could make in 24 hours, like a business transaction with two stubborn CEOs. He talks about Putin and Zelensky like they're just two people who haven't been in the same room with the right mediator. And he positions himself as that person, the closer, the deal maker, the strong man who could shake hands and bring this all to a halt. But the truth, the deep truth, is that this war is not a simple deal. It's not a boardroom negotiation. It's not about leverage. It's about people, about history, about identity. And that's where his vision of peace falls short. Not necessarily because it's dishonest, but because it's incomplete. You see, when Trump calls for peace, he's not calling for justice. He's calling for quiet. And quiet isn't always peace. Tyranny can be quiet. Occupation can be quiet. Silence can be forced. And sometimes what looks like peace is just fear with its mouth closed. That's the danger. Because peace is not just the absence of gunfire, it's the presence of freedom. It's people being able to choose their own leaders. It's a nation being able to chart its own destiny without someone else's tanks rolling across the border. And that's not the kind of peace Trump is selling. What he's offering is more like a ceasefire dressed up as a solution. A pause that lets Putin keep his gains while Ukraine lives with its wounds still open. It's important to understand why this kind of rhetoric is powerful, especially in America. People are tired, they've seen too many wars, they've lost loved ones in countries they can't pronounce. They see headlines about billions going to Ukraine and wonder, what about us? What about home? Trump taps into that fatigue. He speaks to the pain of a mother who wants her son to come back from deployment, to the worry of a factory worker who's struggling to pay rent while seeing news of foreign aid. He uses real emotions to serve a political narrative. And in that way, he isn't just campaigning, he's channeling the anxiety, the disillusionment, the weariness. But that's what makes it so dangerous, because he's offering a shortcut to peace in a world that has no shortcuts. Now let's not pretend Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He's a master of performance. He understands headlines, he understands power, and he understands that calling for peace while others call for war makes him look reasonable, presidential, even moral. But what's missing, what's always been missing, is empathy. He doesn't talk about the Ukrainian child who lost both parents when their apartment was shelled. He doesn't talk about the journalist who vanished after exposing Russian war crimes. He doesn't talk about the millions of refugees who have fled their homes in search of safety. To him, peace isn't about them, it's about him, about how he could have done it better, how he can do it now. It's ego dressed up in olive branches. And I want to be fair because there's value in questioning endless conflict. There's value in asking, are we doing the right thing? Those are necessary conversations. But peace isn't a campaign promise. It's not a line in a stump speech. It's a responsibility, a burden, a sacred calling. It takes more than saying, I'll end it. It takes standing up to bullies, not shaking hands with them. It takes standing beside victims, not trying to silence them for the sake of optics. It takes the kind of strength that comes from deep conviction, not political convenience. So when Trump says he wants peace, I believe he wants something that looks like peace on paper in a poll, maybe on a debate stage. But real peace, the kind that heals wounds and sets people free, that kind of peace requires compassion, it requires sacrifice, and it requires truth. And truth is not Trump's strong suit. His version of peace does not acknowledge the truth of Ukraine's suffering. It does not challenge Russia's lie. It does not comfort the grieving or hold the aggressor accountable. It simply says, let's end this, without ever asking how or for whose benefit. That's not leadership, that's performance. And the stakes are too high for performance. The world is on edge. Children are dying. Families are fleeing. And the very principles of freedom, sovereignty, and democracy are under attack. In this moment, we need leaders who understand that peace is more than just a word, it's a promise to protect, to serve, to stand. There's a moment, maybe you felt it too, when you turn on the news and it's like the world is speaking in two different languages. Like everyone's shouting, but nobody's listening. And in those moments, truth becomes slippery. We start to wonder, who do we trust? Who's telling the real story? That's what's happening right now in America. You've got President Biden on one side standing with Ukraine, sending aid, sending arms, showing the world that America will not sit quietly while democracy is threatened. And then there's Donald Trump on the other side telling crowds that this war should have never started, that peace is just a phone call away, that Ukraine is a distraction. Two completely different messages. Two completely different visions of America's role in the world. And this split, it's not just confusing, it's dangerous. Because when a nation's voice is divided, the world listens and doubts. Global diplomacy is like music. It only works when the instruments are in harmony. And right now the American orchestra is out of tune. One part says we stand for freedom. Another part says we stay out of it. And that disharmony, it echoes across the oceans. It reaches the ears of dictators and strongmen and makes them wonder, is America truly united? Is the West really as firm as it claims to be? That's what Vladimir Putin is counting on. You see, he knows he can't outgun NATO. He can't outspend the West. But he can outlast our unity. He can exploit our divisions. He watches our debates. He studies them. Every speech, every tweet, every rally where Americans argue about whether Ukraine is worth it, that's music to his ears. And what's even more chilling, he knows that if Trump returns to power, everything changes. The aid could stop. The pressure could ease. The spotlight could dim. Because Trump has shown time and again that his loyalty is not to alliances. It's to himself. He's questioned NATO. He's praised autocrats. He's dismissed global norms as if they were inconveniences rather than lifelines. Now let's be honest, there's always been tension between domestic needs and foreign commitments. That's natural. Americans want to feel safe here. They want jobs, healthcare, security. And yes, they have every right to ask, why are we sending billions abroad when we have problems at home? That's not selfish, that's human. But the answer is not to retreat from the world. The answer is not to abandon our values at the water's edge. Because when America stops standing up for what's right, when we become so divided that even war becomes partisan, then our moral authority collapses. And when that happens, the Putins of the world don't get weaker, they get stronger. They thrive in the cracks of our confusion. They feed on our fatigue. They manipulate our media, our conversations, even our hearts, turning our pain into their power. That's why this polarization is so much more than just a political issue. It's a national security issue. It's a global leadership issue. It's a test of who we are when the world needs us most. And this test isn't just for the politicians, it's for all of us. Because every time we fall into us versus them, every time we treat patriotism like a party badge, we erode the very unity that gives democracy its strength. It's not enough to just vote blue or red. We have to vote human. We have to think not just as Americans but as citizens of the world. Because when bombs fall on Kyiv, when refugees cross borders in the freezing cold, when a generation of children grows up knowing only the sound of sirens, that is not just their burden, it's ours too. It matters what we say. It matters what we believe. It matters whether we see Ukraine not as a headline, but as a heartbeat. Because if we let our political divisions keep us from seeing the truth, if we allow peace to become a partisan tool, then we lose something far greater than an election. We lose our... And here's the thing, the people who suffer the most from our divisions aren't the politicians. It's the everyday people. The Ukrainian grandmother sleeping in a subway station. The American soldier deployed far from home. The Russian dissident jailed for daring to speak. They are the ones who pay the price when leaders fight each other instead of standing together. So as Trump calls for peace and Biden calls for support, we must ask ourselves, what kind of peace do we want? What kind of support do we believe in? And more importantly, can we find a way to disagree without dismantling the unity that gives our words weight on the world stage? Because America's divided voice is not just confusing to the world, it's weakening us. And in a time when truth is fragile, when democracy is under attack, and when lives are on the line, we cannot afford to whisper when the world needs our roar. We must speak with one voice. A voice that says, we may not be perfect, we may not always agree, but we will always stand for what's right. Because that is what true leadership looks like. That is what peace demands. When I think of Ukraine, this beautiful, resilient country torn by war, I don't just see a place on the map. I see people. I see a young girl wrapping her arms around her father's neck before he goes to the front line. I see a teacher leading children down a school hallway turned into a bomb shelter. I see hands trembling, not from fear but from the sheer determination to survive. Because this war, it's not just about land, it's not just about lines on a map or headlines in the evening news. It's about identity. Ukraine is not fighting for politics. Ukraine is fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be free. For decades they've lived in the shadow of a mighty neighbor, a neighbor who insists that Ukraine is part of its past, part of its body, something that should be controlled rather than embraced. But the Ukrainian people have been quietly, fiercely shaping a future that looks nothing like the one Moscow wants for them. And now as bombs rain down and cities are reduced to rubble, they are screaming with every ounce of their being, we will not be erased. That kind of defiance, it doesn't come from policy. It comes from the soul, from generations of struggle, from grandparents who lived under the weight of Soviet rule, from mothers who whispered to their children at bedtime, one day, this land will be ours again. From young men and women who carry homemade flags into war zones as if they were shields, not because they were drafted, but because they believe. They believe that their identity is worth dying for. And let me tell you something, when people are fighting not just for protection but for purpose, you are witnessing the deepest form of courage. It's not about winning in the traditional sense. It's about refusing to disappear. It's about showing the world, we are not Russia's story to tell anymore, we are our own. Now imagine that. Imagine being a nation, a people, who have to justify your very existence on the world stage. Imagine watching the world debate your future as if you're not in the room. That's the pain Ukraine carries every day. But pain has a way of producing something sacred. It produces unity. It produces clarity. And in Ukraine's case, it has produced an unbreakable identity. While the bombs fall, people are getting married in underground stations. Musicians are performing concerts in the ruins of theaters. Students are holding graduation ceremonies amid ruins, holding up diplomas as proof that hope is still alive. Because what they are saying with every breath, every act of normalcy, is this: you will not take away who we are. You can take our buildings, but you can't take our spirit. You can tear up our roads, but you will never detour our dreams. You can silence our radios, but not our voices. And while the rest of the world may look at this as a geopolitical chess match, the people of Ukraine know better. This is not a game. This is a fight for the right to exist without permission, a fight to speak their own language, teach their own history,
build their own future without looking over their shoulder at a neighbor who wants them broken and obedient. This war is about dignity, about freedom, and more than anything, about identity. It's about a nation saying, we are not someone else's little brother. We are not a puppet. We are not a lost province. We are Ukraine, and we will never be anything else. And that matters because when the world talks about peace, we must understand what kind of peace we're asking Ukraine to accept. Are we asking them to give up part of themselves to end the fight? Are we asking them to return to a time when their sovereignty was conditional, when their very name was whispered in the language of another empire? We cannot ask a people to trade their identity for our comfort. We cannot ask them to forget who they are just so the rest of us can turn off the news. True peace, real peace, must honor what they're fighting for. It must recognize that Ukraine is not just seeking safety. They are demanding recognition. They are demanding the right to write their own story, in their own voice, with their own pen. So when we see them resist, let us not pity them. Let us not say they are brave. Let us say they are alive. Because identity is life. And when a nation dares to say this is who we are in the face of tanks, bombs and betrayal, that is not just resistance, that is rebirth. And that is what the Ukrainian people are giving the world right now. Not just a lesson in courage, but a lesson in the power of selfhood, in the power of love for one's roots, and in the truth that freedom is never given, it is claimed. And they are claiming it every day. We all want peace, in our homes, in our hearts, in our world, and especially in moments like this, when the sky over Ukraine turns red, when families sleep underground to escape bombs, when the whole world feels like it's coming undone. We long for peace like we long for air. But I want to say this to you as clearly, as truthfully, and as soulfully as I can. Peace is not just a word. It is not a slogan, not a soundbite, not a headline. Peace is hard. Peace is earned. Peace is built. And right now we are seeing too many people, especially in positions of power, treat peace like it's something you can announce with a microphone and declare in a tweet. But that's not peace. That's performance. Because real peace takes work. It takes listening to the pain of the people who are bleeding. It takes holding accountable those who cause that pain. It takes rebuilding what has been broken, not just the buildings but the trust, the dignity, the sense of safety that war steals from people's lives. And when I hear some leaders like Donald Trump stand up and say, I could end this war in 24 hours, I don't hear a solution. I hear a shortcut. I hear a man who wants applause, not answers, who wants credit, not clarity. Because you cannot end a war built on injustice by ignoring the injustice. You cannot bring peace by shaking hands with the one who brought the violence in the first place. That's not peace, that's surrender dressed in diplomacy. Real peace would mean the Ukrainian people get their homes back, not in pieces but whole. Real peace means the mothers who buried their children get more than condolences. They get justice. Real peace means the truth gets to rise, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it costs something. You see, peace is not soft. It is not passive. Peace is active. It requires courage. It requires compassion. It requires choosing people over politics, healing over headlines. Peace is not when the bombs stop. Peace is when the fear stops, when the oppression stops, when the silence that's forced by power turns into the voice of freedom. And that is what we must remember in this moment. Because when people call for peace, without recognizing the pain, without acknowledging the injustice, they're not really asking for peace. They're asking for quiet. And there's a difference. There's a big difference between peace and quiet. Quiet can be coerced. Quiet can be bought. Quiet can be the sound of people too afraid to speak. But peace is truth. It's transparency. It's safety that lives in the soul, not just in policy. So when Trump or anyone else claims they can bring peace by sitting down with Putin and cutting a deal, we must ask, what are they willing to trade? Are they willing to trade away Ukraine's right to choose its own future? Are they willing to let Russia keep the pieces it has taken just so the world can stop watching the war on TV? Because peace built on broken promises is not peace. It's a delay, a cover-up. And history has shown us, time and time again, that wars paused without justice always find their way back. True peace demands more. It demands humility. It demands empathy. It demands that we see the people, not just the politics. The grandmother crossing the border on foot with nothing but a Bible in her hand. The little boy clutching a stuffed bear in a refugee center. The doctor performing surgery by flashlight in a bombed-out hospital. They deserve more than deals. They deserve dignity. And that's what makes this moment so sacred and so heavy, because we have the power as a global community to define what peace looks like. We can choose a peace that restores, that uplifts, that says to Ukraine, you are not alone, or we can settle for a peace that simply ends the noise and ignores the wounds. But make no mistake, wounds that are ignored do not heal. They fester, they grow, they become the wars of tomorrow. So if we truly care about peace, not just now but for the future, we must fight for a peace that sees all sides, but does not excuse injustice. A peace that brings the aggressor to the table with accountability, not with a clean slate. A peace that helps the wounded stand again and say, we are whole, because peace is not the end of a conflict. It's the beginning of something better, and we owe it to every Ukrainian family, every soldier, every refugee, and yes, even to our own children, to make sure that the peace we pursue is worthy of the pain that has already been endured. Let us not settle, let us not rush, let us build a peace that lasts, one made not from fear but from love, not from shortcuts, but from truth. Because peace isn't just what we want, it's what the world deserves.